Yesterday, I received from the President of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago the report of the Commission of Inquiry into the Las Alturas residential towers, which were built by way of a contract that was awarded through the HDC, having inherited the project from UDCOT. A number of towers were built in Mova, as you may remember, and two of the towers failed engineeringly and eventually had to be demolished. The Commission of Inquiry completed its work and submitted this report. This is a hard copy. And I just today want to apprise the national community and through you the media what the report says. The report has an executive summary which I'll make available to you, the media, at this press conference. But permit me to take you back to the foundation of this development. So here it was, the UDCOT, acting on behalf of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, bought a piece of land in the hills of Mova and set about to build these units. A number of units were built, but UDCOT was not progressing in the way that the then PNM government was satisfied with. And I happen to have been the Minister of Housing who went to the cabinet and asked the cabinet and got agreement to have this and other projects removed from UDCOT and taken over by the Housing Development Corporation, which is a statutory agency whose job it is to build houses of this nature. This was done sometime about 2004, 2005, thereabouts. The particular towers that failed were contracted, I think it was 2009. The contract to build these two towers that failed on a piece of the land that UDCOT bought, those contracts were awarded in 2009. So the buildings other than these two towers are there and occupied now. And the issue of the Commission of Inquiry was about what happened with the two towers that failed. And let me take you to the Newsday of September 19, 2014, under an appropriate headline called Utter Madness. Newsday used that phrase as its headline, Utter Madness, from the comment of the Prime Minister when she spoke to the Parliament. And in the Newsday report, it was made clear that what the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago was doing at the time was going after persons who she felt were politically exposed in that matter. And she went on, along with Attorney General Anand Ramlogan. She told the Parliament that she requested documentation on the project to see the extent of the wastage, financial mismanagement, and possible corruption. I'm quoting Newsday here. She recalled that she cringed when she heard that $26 million towers would have to be demolished at a cost of $2 million. So that's 26 million plus 2, that's 28 million. And that the people of this country had a right to know who is accountable for this construction disaster. And she went on to say that what may soon come out is that the new flag bearer for Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West. His tenure as Minister of Housing is what she's after. And I was named in her statement in the Parliament, and she provided a timeline. I'm quoting Newsday here. She provided a timeline on the project starting on March 31st, 2004, when a unanimous decision was taken by the Judicot Board to award a contract of $67 million to China Jiangsu for 297 units on Lady Young Road. And she outlined, who was on the board and who was the minister and so on. She reported that the names of certain high-profile PNM members continued to appear, and Senator Faris Alwabi's name was called, and so on and so on. And interestingly enough, quoting Newsday again, Prasad Bisesa pointed out that of the 297 apartments that were supposed to be constructed, only 172 were built, and questioned what happened to the money for the additional 125. So these were the issues that troubled the Prime Minister at the time, resulting in a commission of inquiry to get answers for these issues. So that was in September 2014. And if I may refresh your memory as to my response to that, as the minister who was named as Minister of Housing, who had something to do with it, and of course, as opposition leader, I responded. And I'm quoting here in Newsday again of November 1st, 2014. And I'm quoting, while reiterating, he, referring to me, Newsday has quoted me saying, he is prepared to appear before the Commission of Inquiry if required to do so. Rowley maintained Prime Minister Kamla Prasad Bisesa is aware her administration already has the relevant documents and reports it needs to get the answers it wants about this matter. Commenting on this, and I'm still quoting Newsday, commenting on this, Rowley said, I am a law-abiding citizen, and I will continue to be, even when it is clearly to be seen that other attempts to smear me for their own benefit. And I went on to describe this Commission of Inquiry as a witch hunt, and I went on to say that they should try to collect the taxpayers' money from the contractor. And I made mention of the statute of limitation that would apply if the government did not attempt to collect taxpayers' money from the contractor for the 2 towers that failed. The other towers, being okay, were occupied, and I still remain occupied at this time. I'm quoting Newsday again. Rowley argued that instead of recovering taxpayers' money through the terms of the contract, we get a political witch hunt organized and directed by the Prime Minister. Saying this would be, and quoting, Newsday is quoting me, an exercise in futility and demonstration of wanton waste to further the benefit of a fortunate few. Rowley claimed the reason Prasad Bisesa had chosen this course of action is to be able to say that Rowley is under investigation for a matter which has absolutely nothing to do with me. He expressed concerns that this exercise could end up being nothing more than a case of, quote-unquote, more money for lawyers and, quote-unquote, a colossal waste of taxpayers' money. So that's the background. So today we have the report. And simply put, so say, so done. The executive summary, which I said I'll make available to you, points out some very interesting things. First and foremost, it tells us nothing we didn't already know. But it collated and states for the benefit of taxpayers now that there were 25 geotechnical, structural, and investigative reports on this particular problem. 25 geotechnical, structural, and investigative reports. And that is exactly what I said to the Prime Minister at the time. All the information surrounding the circumstances of the failure of these two structures were available to the government at the time that this commission of inquiry was initiated. The commission now confirms that the causes of failure, it is the commission's view that the foundations of these buildings were inadequate to deal with the problems created by the unremedied slope instability. That is the commission's finding. Absolutely nothing new. Reporting what could have been found and what existed in those 25 reports. It also concluded that at the very inception that the failure to carry out proper site meetings prior to the purchase of the land resulted in delays and so on and so on. And it then concludes that the board of directors and their failure of management, the failure of management officials to ensure that there was a full and timely disclosure, not only to the respective line ministry, but also to the Minister of Finance as Corporation Sole, would have been useful. With respect to criminal liability, and I'm quoting the Commission's syntax here, no sufficient evidence was led before the Commission to indicate criminal liability. That's their finding. And it also goes on to conclude these expenditure in excess were described as a waste of taxpayers' money, and it is therefore right to conclude that such entities be held accountable for such waste of public funds, referring here to the management and directors of boards of HGC and UDCOT. Now, that is the sum total of this. And that's the sum total of the finding of the Commission of Inquiry. The Commission of Inquiry, so far, to date, paid by the Office of the Prime Minister, would have cost $24.5 million to arrive at those findings, which were all to be contained in the 25 reports that were available at the time the Commission came into being. Over and above the $24.5 million that was paid to support the inquiry from the Office of the Prime Minister, UDCOT and the HDC would have paid another large number of millions to lawyers to appear and participate in this charade. But most importantly is this: the only reasonable, useful finding that the Commission could have made, the Commission did not make. And it is this: these buildings were being built by a contractor called China Jiangsu, who would have been engaged by contractual arrangements with the state agency, the HDC. And if there was a failure, as there was, and a collapse, and the requirement to demolish the product, the contractor had a liability. And under the terms of the contract, the state agency HDC and the government by extension had an avenue and a duty to hold the contractor under the terms of the contract liable for what they did not deliver and for any shortcoming on the part of the contract. Remember I told you the contract that was awarded to build those 2 buildings that they had to demolish was awarded in 2009. The cracks began to appear sometime in late 2009 and 2010. By the time it became clear that the buildings could not be salvaged and could not be used, the government had changed. And it was the duty of the new government and the board that it appointed to go after the contractor before the 4-year period ended, the statute of limitation. Because if you don't go after the contractor within the 4-year period, the contractor will now no longer be available to you to collect for what they didn't perform properly. So between 2010 and 2014, or 2011 and 2015, the same government that saw it fit to initiate this commission of inquiry that gave us the report I just gave you, studiously refused to go after the contractor under the terms of the contract. And we raised this in the opposition in the parliament, pointing out to the government that you, so interested in what happened with these 2 buildings, you are required to go after the contractor before the statute of limitation ran out. The very last time we spoke publicly to the government about this, we pointed out to the government and the minister responsible for housing, you have 1 more month to go before the statute of limitation runs out. The government did absolutely nothing and allowed the statute of limitation to run out, and therefore deny taxpayers the opportunity to hold the contractor liable for his performance or lack thereof under the contract. Interestingly enough, I see no finding in the summary of the report that the board of the HDC of the date and time, which had the responsibility as managers of the contract, as client to the contract, that board should be held accountable for refusing to exercise taxpayers' rights to go after the contractor to recover for the 2 buildings that had to be demolished. I find that very curious indeed, because that is the only thing that would have been useful, that a board and a management that hired a contractor to build 2 buildings, the 2 buildings had to be demolished, and those responsible for HDC's business took no action and allowed the legal opportunity to expire. But instead we have a commission of inquiry costing about the same price or more than the tower to tell you that they found the 25 reports that existed that said how the building cracked, then it broke open, it became dangerous and had to be demolished. That's the finding of the Commission of Inquiry. And that is the tale of the Commission of Inquiry of 2014 that the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago then, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, launched in the Parliament as a political witch hunt against myself as opposition leader, Member of Parliament for Diego Martin West, and the candidate for San Fernando West, Faris Aluawi. That's what this is all about. It was a political witch hunt that was doomed to fail, to produce nothing useful, fatten lawyers, and the insult to the injury is that the government that had the requirement to go after the contractor flatly and deliberately refused to do so. And to add more insult to injury, the said contractor failed to appear before the Commission of Inquiry because he was too busy building in the new contract that was given to them by the said government that went after them in this matter. So, the full report will be laid in the Parliament Library tomorrow, and I guess the Parliament will put it on the Parliament website because we have a soft copy, and you could go through it in detail. But that is the position of the receipt of the Las Alturas Commission of Inquiry. Any questions? And by the way, there was something else very useful that came up, which you have to be grateful for, is that we now know that the plural of advice is advices. They had so many advisory reports that in the report they're described as advices, and I warn our school children not to read it.
Prime Minister, therefore, given what you just said about this particular report, there's basically no action that the government can take on any issue or recommendation arising out of this report?
The singular action that was available to the government from the beginning was to go after the contractor to recover the money spent in building those towers. The government chose not to do that. There was no other action that was available. You may recall when I said, I had to say, because you were so pointed at me, it had nothing to do with me. And it was the Prime Minister showing her knowledge of reggae music, accused me of being Shaggy. Right? And Shaggy said, you know, it wasn't me. That was her. Because it had to be me, according to her, it had to be me. It had nothing to do with me. The summary here makes no mention of me, makes no mention of Senator Al-Rawi, and worse than that, it was so pointed at me and my colleague that the commission couldn't even call me to the inquiry. I was not called to this inquiry because not a shred of evidence was tendered linking me to it. But they did write me asking me to provide my documents that could assist the inquiry, whatever that meant. Of course, I had no documents and therefore I could be of no assistance.
Mr. Prime Minister, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
Going forward, what does the government have in train, if not for Las Alturas, the question of housing stock? I mean, we have families in waiting, you know, some young, some old, and if not at Las Alturas, and given the, we know the economic times, what does government have in train for distribution?
Oh, well, as you would have heard only yesterday, the Minister of Housing spoke about the program that's underway, where we are aiming to have 1,000 housing starts, I think by the end of the year. I myself opened one in Arima not too long ago, and I think last weekend there was one open. The program continues. There was a little hiatus, a little delay, as we were sorting out the changeover, because there was a lot of outstanding bills and claims for work already done, and there are a number of half-finished projects which we are trying to give priority to so that we could complete those units to make them available, and we are initiating new projects. So the Housing Ministry is just beginning to ramp up and would be a big contributor in the next fiscal year with respect to economic activity. The work has already started, and we would be relying very heavily on the housing program to bring about economic activity as we go forward in the short and medium term. There's no, that has already been done. The two units that could not be occupied, they were built, you know, they were completed. But because the foundation, there was this deep slip plane, which is a geological matter, which was not recognized, and it may not even have been possible to deal with it engineeringly, because they did try. But the end result was they built on land that was moving deep in the earth, and like a landslide. And when the landslide did take place, they broke the buildings, and the buildings became unsafe and could not be occupied. And as the Prime Minister at the time said, it cost $2 million to demolish them, and that has already been done. And all of that would have been contained in the 25 reports that the commission has now confirmed existed.
Now this is the same company that built the hospital?
No, I don't think so. This is the one that built the campus in DBI, in Siparia. China Jiangsu is the name of the company. Right? So this company was awarded the contract to build the campus in DB. Is it DB? Yeah.
But you said at the start that the Commission of Inquiry found liability in respect of the board of the HDC and the management.
Well, to the extent that it is saying that the management of UDCOT and HDC did not properly report upwards to their board and to their minister what was happening on the ground out there, and that they, management and by extension board, should be held accountable. But I guess that is probably proffering another excursion of lawyers. But the bottom line is the criminal content that was supposed to have been there, because you may recall the behavior of the Attorney General at the time and the Prime Minister. It now boils down to, well, the management wasn't telling the board what was happening and the board wasn't telling the minister, something like that. But I mean, in short, the Commission of Inquiry has told us nothing new, because even if you wanted to hold the management accountable, you could have done so from the 25 reports that existed, because the reports would have itemized systematically what happened, who did what, where, and when, and how. It's all there. But the one thing that was available to you was, having decided that the buildings were useless, which you paid for, was to recover your money from the contractor by using the process available to you, which was to ask for a refund from the contractor. And if the contractor failed to comply, then you take the contractor to court and have the court rule, and you collect from the contractor.
So the Commission of Inquiry was a waste of time.
Absolute waste of time and money, as I said in November 2014.
Dr. just to follow up on my colleague's question about the report finding that such entities should be held accountable. Wasn't at that time Mr. Noel Garcia part of the board of the HDC, and he's now at UDCOT, so doesn't that raise concern about competencies and so on?
I don't know what the commission has made no identification of any individual conduct to say individual A or individual B. This is a commission of inquiry that costs $20-odd million in the Prime Minister's office. It has not identified any individual. We have a generic comment, right? And if you go down the route in that way, right, you may very well get down to the driver who didn't take the general manager to the site, being liable. So
someone that we can identify who was on the board at the time.
But I don't know.
Not just Mr. Garcia, but there are other members of that board as well.
Whatever it is, the summary, and the inquiry said in summary that in the overall that there are things that could be put to individuals, not for any criminal conduct, but it's a whole range of things that could happen. I don't know what individuals' conduct is. I would have thought that the commission, having been empaneled with the terms of reference it had, would have been able to identify individuals who. That is not in the report as far as I could see.
On another note, the opposition MP, I think Dr. Rowley this morning said that you were the ministerial chair when that project was conceptualized.
Let me hear that. Sorry?
The ministerial chair is the term that he used. You were part of the ministerial chair when the project was conceptualized. So there is a question about whether there are conflicts of interest in you seeing the report and making pronouncements about whether or not...
I am not going to take anything Dr. Munilal says seriously, you know, because he's a man who frequently says things hoping that you don't understand the truth. I just explained to you this project was started as a UDCOT project before I became Minister of Housing. When I became Minister of Housing, I was not happy with the progress UDCOT was making on this project and others. I took a note to the cabinet to have UDCOT removed from the house building program and take their portfolio into the HDC. I accept that responsibility. I then left the Ministry of Housing in 2007. The contract for these two buildings that failed was awarded on the piece of land in 2009. They were not in sight when I was there. I didn't initiate the project in 2004. I did not have anything to do with the award of this contract, which is what I said when the Commission of Inquiry was being empaneled to go after me in the Parliament. The buildings were built and started to fail and completely failed after the government change. I seem to recall Dr. Moonilal being the Minister of Housing. I just pointed out to you that the one thing the government should have done once the buildings were deemed to have failed and to be useless, resulting in the demolition, is that they had under the terms of the contract the right to go after the contractor for the failure of the project, those two buildings. It is not the whole project that failed. Because if you go to Movan now, you will meet people living in Las Alturas Towers. There was a piece of land that it was a ridge and a slope. The units built on the solid ridge are fine. Where they built on the slope on the south side, the landslide, the deep plane failure was on that slope. That's where they extended the project into in 2009. I left in 2007. So tell Dr. Moonilal, stop calling my name. Okay, and copies are available of the 2004 and the current summary, and you can look at the detail in the Parliament Library tomorrow if you wish. One more question, please.
Now, during the Commission of Inquiry, they indicated that there were a lot of geotechnical reports that spoke to that shifting, moving land, and yet they decided to move ahead with the project. Can you tell us now that...
No. Let's not go that way. Your timeline is not correct. It's not that the land was found to be shifting and moving and yet they decided to go along with the project. No. They located the project on the land. And subsequent to the decision to do that and to build the building, the buildings began to indicate that they were cracking, meaning that the land was slipping, right? Whatever geotechnical work they did before, from my understanding of the reports, and there was a lot of talk about this during the inquiry, that the geotechnical work did not deem the project to be stopped. However, once they built on the land, the buildings could not survive what was going on in the earth below. And the buildings had to be demolished because they were broken. So what they found out after is that they built on land that was not sufficiently engineeringly strong.
So do you think that there were not enough tests done before construction?
That is not for me to think. There's a commission of inquiry, right? And that is to be answered there. I am not going to second guess the inquirers. I'm a geologist, I'm not an engineer. I'm confining myself to the political management of the housing program where they built 2 units on land in a design-build contract where the contractor had a liability. The buildings were not satisfactory. They could not be used. The contractor's engineering was not up to standard. Whether it is geotechnical, whether it is masonry, the liabilities in that situation. It's not the first time a contractor would have done something that didn't meet the client standard, you know. Not the first time. As a matter of fact, you may recall the Currap Bridge. Remember the Currap Bridge? What happened with the Currap Bridge? When they poured the concrete, and when they tested the concrete, it was found not to be up to standard. What did they do in Currap? Break it all. So how come you know to break the Currap Bridge and hold the contractor liable, but you didn't know how to hold this contractor liable for the buildings that couldn't be used?
Do you think do you foresee any adjustments or changes to HC or how things are run so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again?
Of course, I mean, I would, the board of the HGC today, I would expect, would not be allowed to do this. What I could not understand for the life of me, speaking from the opposition in Parliament, is why the government was allowing the statute of limitation to run out so that the contractor will not have a liability. But you're spending $30 million in a commission of inquiry so as to place a liability on Rowley and Rowley.
Sir, could you chance a hypothesis as to why that
Why?
limitation would have been allowed to run?
Because they had no interest in protecting taxpayers' money. The interest was in a political witch hunt. That's what it was. Sad as it is.